Hi, this is Vishwesh, and this is my particle effect assignment for building virtual environments. So here I build few particle effect systems which can be further used for my final game project for building virtual environments course. So now let's walk through the effects one by one. So we'll start from the simplest effect and then we'll proceed to the most complicated effect. So here is the simplest effect. I named it as blood on hit. So this is basically a particle effect which I created to initialize when there is a hurt or when there is a hit to the main character. So I build all these particle effects using Niagara system in Unreal Engine 5. So this is the first system. So it's a lightweight Niagara emitter. So I have used the spawn burst instant in here. So I wanted to keep the blood effect as the burst instance. So while initializing the particle, I'm taking it as red and I'm keeping the lifetime from 0.5 to 1 second. So that is burst and then like the blood effect bursts whenever there is a hit and it immediately disappears. And then I'm adding few velocity and I'm using a cone here so that it starts from a certain central point and then it explodes out. So like after testing, I kept it as like the cone angle as 45 and rotated the cone 90 minus 90 degrees along the x. And then we have a gravity of minus 980, which is like natural gravity of Earth, which is 9.8. So this gives an effect of the particles dropping down as they has come out. And then I'm using a sprite renderer for this. So in this sprite renderer, I'm using a custom material which I will from my own. So this is the material which I built. So I downloaded this blood kind of texture from internet and then I blended it with the particle color. So these particle colors alpha is controlling the like opacity of the material. So here we are doing radial gradient export. So this converts the particles into a spherical shape instead of a square shape. So this gives like a spherical blood drops coming out whenever there's a hit. So if we look at the alpha here, so in the scale color, we are using this alpha to control the opacity of the blood drops. So now we'll see how this works in the game. So if we start this game, so for demo purpose, so I have only one character, so there is no hit or anything. I'm using a keyboard layout. So I'm using keyboard K key to initialize the effect. So if I press K on my keyboard, you can see that the blood drops are falling from the head. This is like a small particle effect I created for blood. So this can be used across all levels. So now we'll move on to the next particle system. So the second particle system which I implemented is waterfall effect. So this is a waterfall fountain which I want to use in my water level. So this is again the Niagara system's fountain emitter. So if we look at this emitter, it's not a burst emitter. It's a continuous loop. So it's an infinite loop with a loop duration of 1. So it continuously generates the effect. So it keeps the structure of like a waterfall, like a water fountain. So in this emitter, I'm spawning it like a 2000 particles at a time. And then initially I'm keeping the lifetime of the particles from 1 to 2 seconds so that at least few particles on the screen and we can see that the particles defecting. So in the preview window, we can see how it's working. So then again, I'm using a cone shape for the fountain. So at bottom, it's like narrow, and then it explodes out as it goes up against the gravity. And then here also we are using the same gravity so that the water doesn't keep floating upwards. After a certain height, it just drops down. And also we are using minimum and maximum velocity speed for the particle so that at which rate they emit out from the center of the cone. And here also we are using a sprite renderer. So it's also like a small boxy particle emptying out. And again, I'm using my custom material here. So this is for my water droplets material. Again, I'm using the same logic here to convert the spherical objects, like the square objects, into a spherical so that they look like water drops. And then the alpha is again controlling the opacity and fade of the particle. So this block gives out a spherical bluish kind of particles, which also matches with my level. So let's see this in action. So this is my assumed template for water level. So if I start in, you can see that the particles start forming. So it's like a little waterfall effect here. We can see that like the water is flowing like a fountain, and this also matches with the whole level's tan color. So that's why I'm using a custom material. And so the blood is common and the attack is also common for all the levels. We can also use it. Here you can see that the blood effect which we created is also working here. So now let's move on to the third particle system which I created. And this is the most complicated system. So if we go to fire level, so this is specific to fire level. So I created this small level which can be further tuned more while developing. So the theme is like a volcano theme. So let's look at the particle system now. So this is a complicated system. So it has like three emitters. So it's again a directional burst emitter from Niagara particle system. So we'll look at them one by one. So first we'll look at the burst ember. So these ones out like tiny particles. So let's look at them one by one. So this volcano burst ember creates this kind of spill of volcano or spill of volcano effect here, as you can see in the preview window. So this is now let's look at the implementation. So if you look at this emitter, so it's again a spawn burst instantaneous emitter, so it bursts out like a volcano effect. So if you look at the emitter state here, I'm again using the infinite loop, so it continuously keeps occurring over time. But the small difference here is there is a loop delay of like 3 seconds. So the duration is 1 second and delay is 3 seconds. So it keeps generating for every 3 seconds, and the duration of the burst is 1 second. And if you look at the particle, I'm using this orangish color for the volcano, and then the min lifetime is 0 and the max lifetime. So it's a random lifetime for different, or as it creates a multiple small particles. So each of them have like a uniform random lifetime. And again, it's also a cone effect with minimum and maximum velocity from 500 to 600. So by adding this velocity, it gives out the effect of exploding. If there is no velocity, it just falls down. And again, these particles are now with gravity of minus 200, which is not natural. So I reduce the gravity here just to keep them in air for some time because they are exploding with certain force. They have the velocity and acceleration, so they might take some time to come down. And again, it's also sprite renderer. So here I'm using a custom material. So I'm using this material for both volcano burst, amber, and then lava particle. So if you look at this is also a custom effect. So I created this molten lava kind of texture, and then I'm using that to like connect to my material's emissive color. So it gives this bright glowing orangish color as you can see in the preview. And again, to make the spherical particles, the squarish particle spherical, we are using this radial gradient exponential. So all this converts the squarish particles into the spherical ones. So we'll move on to the next emitter. So if we enable this, the volcano burst lava, we can see that there is a small ribbon kind of effect being created, which was not there earlier. So without this, it's just like a small particles being spawned. So with this effect, we can see that there is like a dragged ribbon kind of effect. So this is the main idea of using this burst lava. So this gives the feel of lava being floated from the mountain or whatever we are using. So it's also again an infinite emitter with duration of 1. So it has lifespan of 1, like the loop duration 1, and then loop delay is 3. So it starts at every 3 seconds. And I'm using the same color to keep it consistent, and the lifespan is 0.3, which is like slightly less than the particles because this is being generated after the particle, so it should be live. So the minimum lifetime is 0.3 and maximum life is 1. And these particles, so these are spawned based on the event generated by the ember effect. So whenever there is an event generated by this burst ember, the volcano burst lava takes in those events, and then it creates a drag effect from there with the ribbon renderer. So we are using a ribbon renderer here. So we have this event property here. So so the burst ember generates approximately like 40 particles, and this picks up 10 from there and then draws this ribbon effect for 10 particles. So we can see both small particles spilling out and then the kind of lava flowing out at a time. So that's handled here with maximum events per frame. And then we are using this ribbon renderer to get that effect. So again, we are using the same volcano material here to keep it consistent. And then we also have this smoke effect. So this is the final effect in this. So this creates the after effect smoke after volcano eruption. So here it's again a loop. So it's an infinite loop with the duration of 4, which is more than the lava and the embers because the smoke stays in there even after the burst. And then I'm using this gray color here for the smoke. And then I'm spawning it at a rate of 50. So there is a cloud formation instead of bubbles. And then again, we are using a cone. So it starts at a centroid point and then it explodes out. As it explodes, it expands. And the interesting thing here is we are using a gravity of positive. So we are using positive gravity just because it's a smoke which is lighter than the air and it should flow upward. It shouldn't come towards the ground. And it's a sprite renderer. So in this sprite renderer, again, I'm using the material. This is the custom smoke material again, which I created. So I created this small smoke texture and then I'm using a blend overlay and blending it with the volcano effect. So you can see the resulted output is like a kind of white, blackish, grayish smoke. And then due to this overlay of bright orange, we can see some greenish effect, which is like gases or something. So this gives a nice effect of toxic smoke in the volcano effect, as you can see. So these are the three main emitters and the particle systems for the volcano. And I also have this fire dust. So this is used in the level. So this is a volcano ash which will be floating around the clouds, or else which will be floating around in the environment. So it's a hanging particle effect. So it's again from the Niagara particle system. So as you can see in the preview window, it's just like ash dust which will be floating around. So I use this to have the volcanic effect throughout the level when the player is moving around. So here we are adding the wind force to it. So the wind force is 10 on all directions. So this enables the particles to move along, and I kept it 10 on all directions. So it moves in all x and y, x, y, and z directions within the level. So now let's see how it works. If we go into the level and start playing, so we had an initial delay of 3 seconds, so there's no effect. So once there's a burst, we could see that the smoke is coming up, and we can also see the ash dust, the volcanic ash which is floating around. And then we can see for every 3 seconds there's being an eruption which is creating the sparks, and then the ribbon. The same with here. So again, if you look at this, so there's a spark being generated, and then the ribbon effect, like it's looping for every 3 seconds, and the dust around volcano. This gives like a feel of dust particles, ash particles flowing around. So this is the sample level which can be improved a lot. To summarize, have these four systems. One for blood on hit. So this applies whenever there is a hit to the player. So I'm controlling the hit based on the player blueprint. So if you look at the blueprint, so right now I'm using keyboard key to control it. So whenever K is pressed, it initializes at a location. So after developing the game, this will be from the hit position. So whenever there is hit, the blood will be emitted from the position of hit. And then again, I have the fire dust, which is the environmental ash during volcano, and the volcano burst, which has like smoke, the sprites being generated, and the ribbon, and the volcano water fountain, which creates a small water fountain like effect. So all these are Niagara effects, which can be just created by right clicking in the window, and then we can just pick a Niagara system, and we can start with the basic system which we want. We can select them. If you want a blowing particle, we can just pick this up. Then we can start making modifications on this. So this is how I created all the four particle effects using Niagara system.